Hi, my friends. Welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State, my daily video. Back in Connecticut now. I had to do Fridays from Washington, D.C. while I was in a car. It was cool, though. The driver holds it in the on the front seat above by the headrest, and you get a pretty good visual. It's a new studio. Mueller has, of course, indicted Manafort and his associate. I forget the name, but the reason he indicted him really bears explanation, and we really have to understand it. It's obviously not just the crimes that Manafort is alleged to have committed. And boy, that's a huge amount of money that he got, and huge amount of money to hide from paying taxes if he did, and all of that. I mean, how do you spend $500,000 on a tailor? I mean, the most a suit is maybe $10,000. What are you going to do? Get 50 suits? Anyway, the important thing about why he indicted Manafort is the obvious reason is to squeeze him, to try to see if he can, if Mueller can use the threat of a long jail sentence. And Eileen, my wife, tells me that he may be looking at 20 years for what he did. That a long jail sentence to get him to turn on Trump. But look, I may be totally naive about this, but I do not believe there is anything that Manafort can tell Mueller that will help him go after Trump. I don't think there was any collusion with Russia, and I don't think Trump was involved in any. I don't know if Manafort was. I doubt it. But certainly Trump wasn't. And to do. So it's very unclear what he really wants. Once you squeeze Manafort, you find that there's no juice there. I'm sorry, we just had a quick power outage, but came back. Once you squeeze the orange and you find out there's no juice left in it, why do you go on squeezing it? But I think there was another motive. I think that the reason Mueller came out with this today, and the reason he teased it on a Friday so that it would remain au courant over the weekend, would dominate the Sunday talk shows, everybody would be wondering what the deal is. The reason he did this in a public relations sense is that he's desperate to stave off the scrutiny that he's going to be getting from Congress on two fronts. First, the scrutiny over the Uranium Deal. The Russian collusion is his scandal, and it's his turn to do the indicting, and he's the investigator, and he's damned if somebody's going to turn the table on him. But in fact, he needs the tables turned on him. In fact, he needs to recuse himself, and I hope you sign the petition on my website, dickmorris.com, calling for Mueller to recuse himself. But in the Uranium One deal, he is absolutely the focus of the investigation. There was a committee that oversaw this investment that had to okay Russia buying a fifth of our uranium reserves, and it was not told about the FBI investigation of a Russian bribery and extortion plot aimed at inducing the very sale they were supposed to ratify. And Mueller was the head of the FBI during that, and he didn't say boo. There was no revelation of any of this. So obviously, this bears investigation. This needs investigating, and Mueller can't both be the prosecutor and the target of the investigation. Now, on a less cosmic level, he was facing some significant scrutiny from the House Republicans. He does not have to have an annual appropriation. He gets his money from a fund that the Treasury Department keeps. But every 4 months, he has to submit a statement of what his expenditures have been, what his salaries are, what he spent his money on. And that then becomes public. And I think that this has to be filed in the next week or two. And I think that he needs to show some scalps on the wall in return for the money that he got, because he doesn't want the headlines to be Mueller got $80 million, but nothing to show for it. So he moved up the schedule on the indictments and brought them up fast so that he could say, look, I've been doing my duty. And the other risk he faces is that beyond just complaining about the amount of money he spent, the Republicans in the House are looking seriously at two amendments. One limiting the time frame of his investigation, saying it has to be completed by the end of the fiscal year, meaning October of next year or sooner, or also limiting the scope of the investigation and saying it can't go beyond anything that happened in the year before Donald Trump was elected president through the current. Can't go back fishing all the way back. So in the face of those two possibilities, he needed some good public relations, and he needed to post a good PR message on the board, and that's why he brought this indictment. One indication of how public relations conscious he was is that he did not indict Manafort's wife or daughters. That's a normal move for a prosecutor, and he probably didn't because he didn't want people to think badly of him. It was a public relations war, and that's why Mueller did what he did.
Thomas Hillebrand asks, when did the guilty plea leave the Trump campaign?
Well, the guilty plea you're talking about was not, of course, Manafort or his associate. It was a guy whose name, again, I forget, I'm sorry, Papadopoulos or something like that. And he was a guy who loosely is a Trump advisor. He may have sat on an advisory committee, but probably not. Probably just styled himself as a Trump advisor like Carter Page did. And he at some point proposed a plan to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli dispute. And it was a plan for borders and a new map and all of that stuff. And he pushed on Trump, suggesting that he meet with the Russians to get their approval for this and to get this going. I doubt he ever actually met Trump. I doubt Trump ever saw the proposal, and in any case, it's got nothing to do with anything. The reason he was indicted was because he lied about it to federal investigators, and that's the crime for which he was indicted, and that's what he pled guilty to. But that's a dead end.
Glenn Rogers asks, can President Trump do anything with Mueller other than letting it play out?
Yeah, he can. In fact, I was surprised the other day. Trump tweeted something. He said, we'll, I have that here. Yeah, he said, Trump to Republicans, do something on the uranium deal. Well, come on, Mr. President, you're the one who needs to do something. Get Sessions to appoint a new prosecutor to investigate the Uranium One deal. And Rosenstein has to ask Mueller to recuse himself. Rosenstein will never do that because he himself is an object of this investigation, because he was in charge of overseeing the FBI during the time of this Uranium One scandal when the FBI did no investigating. But there's plenty for Trump to do. And I think now there's a real potential for offense. And I think it's fear of that offense that led to the early disclosure of this indictment. Now, I've got something else. Wait until you hear this one. And this is one I don't think you know about. You know, there's this committee that they set up called the Committee on Foreign Investments in the U.S., FIUS, it's called, something like that. And the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States is this committee of cabinet-level people that included Hillary and included Holder as the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. Guess who Obama appointed to be the head of the advisory staff of this committee, the key staff member to this committee? A guy named Amen Nabi Mir, M-I-R is his last name. He was a former two-time president of the youth wing of the Islamic Society of North America. From 2009 until 2014, he served as the chief advisor to the Foreign Investment Committee, Foreign Investments in the United States, during the whole period that this uranium deal was approved. It went through at the end of 10, the beginning of 11, and Mir was the chief staff member of the committee during that period. Now, the Islamic Society of North America is one of the largest Muslim Brotherhood front groups in the United States, and was named by the Department of Justice as an unindicted co-conspirator in the 2008 Holy Land Foundation Hamas terror funding trial. So this guy is an Islamic militant, and he was the one who was in charge of saying it was okay to get rid of our uranium supply and deliver it to the Russians. Mueller also played, this is all from Frank Gaffney's Center for Security Policy. Gaffney is a former Undersecretary of Defense under Reagan and is really the guy who rides herd on all of the terror doings. Mueller also played a key role in the Treasury Department's refusal to investigate the United Arab Emirates Gulftainer 35-year cargo container terminal lease at Port Canaveral. What that is, Port Canaveral, formerly Cape Canaveral, is a major facility for U.S. naval and space operations. And the UAE came in and got a 35-year lease of a cargo container inside that facility. And because it was to a foreign country, that also had to come before the Foreign Investments Committee. And the Treasury Department refused to conduct two legally required investigations of Port Canaveral's 2014 container terminal lease concession to the UAE's Gulftainer was the name of the company. Even though they were required to, the law said that if you have any foreign facility about something there in a U.S. military facility, it has to be investigated, and yet they refused to. That decision awarded control of Port Canaveral's cargo container terminal to Saddam Hussein's rogue nuclear weapons scientist and designated Iraq War enemy combatant Dr. Jafar Dia Jafar, Dr. Jafar's brother and business partner, Gulftainer co-owner Hamid Jafar. The Gulftainer deal effectively placed Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons mastermind, along with his longtime Russian KGB and Iran regime associates, and the UAE emir inside the wire of a national security sensitive U.S. port. Gulftainer misrepresented its true ownership, facts that Mueller could and should have uncovered easily. A World Bank International Finance Corporation document, now scrubbed from the IFC website, proved that Gulftainer was owned in part by Sultan bin Mohammed Al Qasimi, the Emir of the United Arab Emirates. Under the Foreign Investment Securities Act of 2017, any foreign government ownership of an acquiring entity automatically triggers a mandatory Committee on Foreign Investments in the U.S. review, regardless of whether it's a purchase or a lease. So let me just explain that in layman's terms. There's this facility, where a lot of our space and naval operations are conducted and planned. The United Arab Emirates bid on a container contract for a container facility inside the perimeter, inside the wire of this center. Because it was owned by the UAE, it had to be reviewed by the Committee on Foreign Investments. But because UAE owned it through a pseudonym, it was never reviewed. And Mir, the guy who was in charge of making that decision, is the Islamist guy who Obama put in charge of advising the investment committee. So it is incredible. An Islamic extremist who was for 2 terms the head of an organization that was an unindicted co-conspirator in the terror trial of Hamas was the person who Hillary had to go to get his approval or his advice on whether that sale of uranium should go through, and also was the one who decided whether it was okay for the United Arab Emirates to lease a huge cargo container right inside of the facility where our most important national secrets were being kept. Do you believe that?
We have a lot of questions rolling in. First of all, Donna Jean Hudson wants to know, how many signatures do we have on Mueller?
We have 15,000 now, and I'm hoping that we can get it up around 25,000. This is a petition on my website now to ask Mueller to recuse himself. And now that he's reared his ugly head with this indictment, let's double down on this. Let's really go after it. This is something we really need to do. You have to see the Manafort indictment as an effort by Mueller to improve his image so he doesn't get fried over his high expenditures and budget.
And Steve Strawn wants to know, do you think Mueller did this because the heat was on him to resign?
I don't think it was so much the heat was on him to resign. It was that his scandal was fading into the background. Nobody was paying attention to the Russian collusion scandal. They were much more interested in the emergence of the dossier and who paid for it and the sources of the dossier. They were much more interested in the Russian uranium bribery scandal and what the FBI knew and when it knew it, and why Mueller and Comey didn't do anything about it but let the whole election transpire, let the uranium sale go through without revealing this investigation. And he needed to get the attention focused back on his inquiry. And the only way to do that was to bring an indictment, and the only guy who was available to be indicted had sufficient evidence was poor old Manafort.
And Jack Tapper asks, do you think Mueller can taint any information coming in that may implicate him in the Uranium One investigation?
Can taint it? Yeah, he can. But ultimately, that information is going to come in separately, particularly if there is a special prosecutor. Now, if there's no special prosecutor for the Uranium One scandal, you're effectively asking the FBI to investigate itself, which is never going to happen, and then there'll be all the tainting you can imagine. So that needs to be taken out of the FBI and put into its own special prosecutor, which can proceed cleanly and go ahead and evaluate the evidence.
We have a question from Chris Wellens. He wants to know, when will we get back to the DNC, Uranium One, and Russia? It's obvious to me Manafort is just a shiny object.
Yeah, well, tomorrow. I mean, I think we all have to realize the importance of that we must not be distracted by, as you put it so well, the shiny object, but instead look at the real scandal underneath. Now, there's a new development in the real scandal, which is that it turns out that a newspaper, the Washington Free Beacon, which is a very good conservative newspaper that operates out of Washington and breaks stories nobody else will touch, and it was the original funder of Fusion when Trump was running in the Republican primary. And its mandate then was to dig up dirt on Trump to defeat him in the Republican primary. It had nothing to do with Russia or collusion or any of that. But then when Trump got the nomination, the Free Beacon withdrew and said, we're not interested in it anymore because Trump is our candidate. And then the Democrats moved in under Hillary, replaced the funding, and made Fusion their operative, the arm of Hillary's campaign. It's very important for us to focus on another aspect of this vis-a-vis Hillary. It is not legal for a political campaign to give a lawyer $8 million and say, spend it as you want, don't tell us, and we won't tell the FEC. We'll just call it legal fees. That's not legal. The very essence of the FEC is not just to control who gives to campaigns, but what campaigns spend their money on. And that's why you're required to disclose everything that you spend money on in a campaign. A burdensome record-keeping requirement, but one that's very important. And in turning over a slush fund to this guy and at Perkins Coal, and letting Elias is his name, and to let him spend it as he wishes without even telling any of the people, is itself a violation of the FEC. No, I don't believe that happened for a second. I don't believe that Ellis or Elias or Perkins Coal would at all do that without Hillary's permission. But there was this legal setup so that she could legally deny that she knew anything about it. And by the way, it has also come out that President Obama's committee, OFA, Organizing for America, in 2016 When he was not running for re-election, Obama was not on the ballot. There was no political operation. In 2016, they paid Fusion $800,000. Why would they do that? What could Fusion possibly do for them that they needed that would cost nearly so much money? $800,000 in 2016 to Organizing for America. So obviously that money was probably joined with Hillary's money in funding Fusion and in funding this trap that they set for Donald Trump. So that it was apparently not just a Hillary operation, but a Hillary-Obama operation. And because Obama was president and controlled the Justice Department and the FBI, this is all a matter of intense interest.
Beth Newsom asks, Uranium Deal, sorry, it's scrolling. I'm having a little issue with my internet. The Uranium Deal has been public knowledge for years. Why was it not investigated when it happened? I read that about it on YouTube years ago.
When it happened, nobody paid any attention. It was not a deal with Putin's name on it or Russia's name on it. It was a deal to sell some mines from the original owners in the U.S. to a Canadian company called Uranium One. And we trust Canada. We don't think that there's anything wrong with Canada owning a lot of our uranium. And Putin had not taken over Uranium One until moments before that sale happened. He bought a 51% share, Rosatom did, in Uranium One, not moments, but a few months before this deal went through. So it was only later that we realized that, in effect, this uranium was being sold to Russia. And one of the reasons I guess we didn't know about it is that this Islamic extremist, this head of a terrorist-supporting organization, was appointed by President Obama to be in charge of advising the Foreign Investment Committee. So naturally they got it wrong. None of this came out until Peter Schweitzer, who now works for Breitbart, who deserves the Nobel Prize, unearthed it in his book Clinton Cash. And the New York Times, to its credit, ran 2 front-page stories about it. But the dots weren't connected until now, when we understand that this deal where they paid Bill Clinton, to give a speech and in return got the uranium sale approved was just the tip of the iceberg. That for 5 or 6 years before that, the Russians had planted sleeper agents to try to infiltrate Hillary's world, and they had in fact infiltrated the worlds of one of her chief donors, the head of her Senate Finance Committee, becoming his accountant and handling all of his tax records. And then after the deal was approved, there was a 5 or 6 year program of bribery and extortion to solidify the Russian control over the uranium, and the FBI was hot on that trail, and none of that was disclosed. When it finally came out about 2 weeks ago, it's blowing this scandal sky high.
Dick, Craig Corsini asks, how do you see this matter playing out?
I think that there will inevitably be a special prosecutor to investigate the Uranium One scandal. 2 or 3 senators have called for it. The Wall Street Journal has called for it. We have in our petitions. And I think that it needs a special prosecutor, because you can't both be the investigating arm, the FBI, and be under scrutiny for why you didn't disclose this in public when it was in the national interest to do so, and there was a political campaign being fought about just this. Now, once that happens, you're going to have dueling special prosecutors, each investigating their own scandal. The anti-Republican scandal about was there collusion with Moscow over meddling in the election, and the anti-Democrat, anti-Clinton scandal of the sale of the uranium to Putin. Ultimately, there's nothing there in the Mueller scandal. In effect, Trump is not the victim or the object. He's the handicap of this investigation. He's got a nice little scandal going there. He's got Manafort taking a lot of money from a Putin puppet in the Ukraine and not reporting it on his taxes, and he's got other people doing other things, but nothing involving Trump. The indictment of Manafort doesn't even mention Trump or contain any lead that could following lead to Trump, whereas the investigation of Uranium One clearly aims at Clinton because she sat on the committee and he gave the speech and got the money for that uranium sale.
We have a question from Anna Moroz, M-R-O-Z, I'm sorry, Anita Moroz. The FBI already had the evidence on Manafort, so what has Mueller been doing with his time and our money? This is a smokescreen.
They didn't have most of it. The Ukrainians have it, the good Ukrainians, the pro-Western ones. They had launched their own investigation of Manafort, but they couldn't tell whether he paid taxes on the money or whether the various bank accounts were for money laundering. That took U.S. investigative authorities. But it didn't take 16 lawyers 6 months to do that. That's true. Now, there's another question that comes up that has not been asked about this uranium scandal and about the whole investigation, which is, why did Fusion select Christopher Steele to investigate this and to amass this dossier? Why him? Why a Brit, a former British spy who had contacts in Russia, but not recent contacts? He'd not been in Russia since 1992, and he was persona non grata. He was not allowed to go to Russia, so he couldn't use the contacts he'd had when he was a British spy there 20 years ago, 20 years before. I believe that they chose Steele partially because he was prestigious, he was well known in those circles, and he was experienced. But I think much more importantly, he could work seamlessly, confidentially, and in a trustworthy secret environment with the FBI on the one hand and MI6 on the other. He came from MI6. He was their spy, British intelligence. And he served for over a decade after he came in from the cold, in from the field, in London, running the bureau that investigated the Soviet Union. And he also, after that, was on contract with the FBI to investigate the FIFA scandal, the soccer scandal, and was paid for that. And the FBI has refused to disclose what financial links they had with Steele since then, but there are reports that he kept filing reports about the Ukraine and about the political conflicts there, and he may well have been paid by the FBI to do that. And we do know that the FBI offered him extra money to investigate the Trump connections with Moscow right in the middle of an election. The Democratic Party at President, his agency, officially offered to do the negative research against the Republican candidate for president in the middle of an election. We need a battery thing here.
Oh, okay. We're going to have to unplug the mic then. Sorry, guys.
So there's that connection. And the idea is that you had a guy here who was wired both in the UK and in Washington and could keep both of them posted and both of them aware of what's going on, and was trusted by both of them. And therefore they wouldn't mind working with him, they wouldn't mind spending time with him, and they could see him as being a valuable resource. Otherwise, why would they choose Steele? Why would they choose someone that expensive, someone who is not an American? I don't know, and that certainly is a very interesting angle to look at. Now, there is one other thing that I want to talk about a little bit. UN aid to the Palestinians, as you know, accounts for 90% of their budget. And we, until now, have accounted for over half of the UN budget that goes to the Palestinian Authority. We're now terminating that. We'll see if we really do. Trump has said that we will. But it has now come out that the United Nations gave the Palestinians $1.3 billion, not for humanitarian relief, not for food, not for electricity, not for any of that. $1.3 billion to learn how to use the laws to sue Israel, to use what's now called lawfare. Instead of warfare, it's lawfare. Use the courts, use the International Criminal Justice Court, use the judiciaries of the different countries, the U.S. and the U.K. and Israel, to handicap Israel's efforts in its ongoing fight with the Palestinians. An independent monitoring group is asking the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, to explain why the world body is planning to spend $1.3 billion across 16 different agencies to fund Palestinian lawfare campaigns against Israel in international accountability mechanisms, training, capacity building, and technical advice to ensure that the Palestinian victims and institutions make effective use of international accountability mechanisms in order to hold Israel accountable for its violations under international law. The UN will increase its support for Palestinian institutions and Palestinian victims of violations to monitor, advocate, seek legal recourse for violations by the occupying power, meaning Israel. It's a kind of legal aid society dedicated to helping the Palestinians sue Israel and handicap it, taking advantage, of course, of the global legal framework and of the legal frameworks in Israel and the United States, where there is fairness, there are trials, there are defense attorneys, taking advantage of all of that in order to handicap Israel and stop it from governing the Palestinian territories. All the more reason why we ought to be ratcheting back our involvement in the United Nations, including contributing to that fund.
Dick, Brandon Altos asks, Mueller was appointed to deal with Russian collusion. Why do special prosecutors always divert into things they weren't appointed to investigate?
Well, part of the reason for that is that they're squeezing people to get them to testify against the guy who they're supposed to investigate by going after people for lesser crimes. For example, when Kenneth Starr was appointed to investigate Bill Clinton's real estate dealings in Whitewater in Arkansas, he indicted Jim Guy Tucker, the governor of Arkansas, for being involved in a cable television deal that had Clinton's approval. And the goal of that was to squeeze Tucker and get him to turn on Clinton, get him to turn state's evidence, and use his testimony to convict or go after Clinton for his time as governor. So that's a standard prosecutorial tactic. He didn't, by the way. There was nothing there to squeeze. But he didn't do that, but he did. But Starr did bring the indictment. Sometimes what happens is that the initial crime that you're investigating turns out not to be a crime or not to have happened. And then a special prosecutor is stuck, having spent tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars and taken up all this time and all this oxygen, all this attention for something that was not a crime. That, I think, is where Mueller is headed with the Trump collusion charges. I mean, he's got to produce something for his time to show that he did something worthwhile, and therefore he'll indict a target at hand, even if he can't get the main target that he's after. A good example of that was was the special prosecutor who was in, I think, Fitzpatrick, who was in Fitzgerald, who was in charge of investigating who spilled the beans on Valerie Plame being a CIA agent. And it turned out that the guy who did it, Richard Armitage, was entitled to do it. There was no crime. So after that, Fitzgerald said, I got to make this look good. So he indicted Scooter Libby, the chief of staff to Dick Cheney, on a charge of perjury and obstruction of justice. He was subsequently pardoned. The most extreme example of this is that after Starr gave up in the Whitewater deal, he went after Monica Lewinsky and went after Clinton's perjury in the Paula Jones deposition, lying about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. If anything could be farther afield from an Arkansas real estate deal, I don't know what it is.
Dick, Judy Farrell Barnes asks, what about Sessions? He's doing nothing about the Clintons.
Well, yeah, exactly. We've got to light a fire under him. Sessions has come through on one important point. which is the opening, and maybe we'll get a lot more out of him. He has ordered the FBI informant who covertly investigated this whole Uranium One bribery deal to testify before Congress about what he knows. He had been gagged by an order of the previous Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, and Sessions released him from the gag order. So very soon we'll get his testimony and we'll learn all of the details of this Uranium One investigation. But that's one of about 40 things that Sessions needs to do. One of them is he needs to let the Freedom of Information Act function and let Judicial Watch get the documents that it wants about the Hillary email scandal and about Comey's role and why he chose to reveal this investigation and why he prepared a memo exonerating Hillary months before Hillary testified, months before he announced it publicly, and months before 16 other witnesses testified as to the facts of the case. A lot of stuff there, and we've got to get that information out, and Sessions can do that, but so far he's not. I hope the release of the FBI informant is the beginning of an opening process.
Well, Nancy Aronson says, Rogue Spooks is right on. I'm reading it for the second time.
Yeah, Rogue Spooks, our book, it explains everything that's going on. We anticipated this indictment of Manafort. We anticipated the connection with Russian uranium. We anticipated that fusion had been paid by the Clinton campaign, and we anticipated that that this whole effort was funded and the information supplied by government intelligence agencies. There's a lot more to come out that's in our book, but read it and focus on it. It's a very real eye-opener to what's been going on.
And Mark Rhodes wants to know, who are the likely rhinos who first funded the fake dossier?
The key guy was Paul Singer, who is who I think that's his name, who is the very wealthy guy behind the Washington Free Beacon. But don't be down on him. He's a very good guy. He spends a lot of money on Republican candidates, usually true blue conservatives. And Washington Beacon is one of the only operations out there that really spends money on investigative reporting, digs down, and gets the reality. Without the Washington Free Beacon, we wouldn't know a lot of the stuff that we now do. And obviously the paper doesn't make any money. It's a contribution Singer is making to the greater good. He was misguided, I guess, at the start of the presidential campaign, thinking that Trump could never win and wanting to help other candidates. But we don't know his motivation or really what the Beacon did. We just know that they were the ones that funded it.
And Sonny Simpson, that's a new name. So in your opinion, how deep does the scandal go, and how bad will it shake our government up when and if it's all exposed?
I think it goes all the way up to Obama. It goes to Hillary and Bill Clinton. It goes to Loretta Lynch, and probably before that to the previous Justice Department. I think that it really is all over the place, and I think it's going to be a very serious thing that will fundamentally undermine the way the FBI and the CIA operate, and in Britain maybe MI6. It'll be much like the Church Committee investigations in the 1970s, when we first discovered that the CIA was assassinating foreign leaders and plotting coups d'etats, and we reined it back in, and something like that is going to be necessary now. Now today's Monday, and on Friday I was not with Renee, and I was in Washington, and she didn't bug me to do my Churchill joke. So right, I have to do my Churchill joke for you now. But before I do, I just want to thank Frank Bear Fan, for the selfie of the day holding my book, Rogue Spooks.
I'll be posting it when we close out.
One of George Bernard Shaw's most famous plays was St. Joan, about Joan of Arc. It's a wonderful play and well worth reading. And Shaw, who was a socialist in Britain and was constantly needling Churchill, who was a conservative, sent Churchill 2 tickets. And he said, "Winston, please find enclosed 2 tickets to my opening night performance of St. Joan. Bring a friend, if you have one. And Churchill wrote back, Shaw, cannot make your opening night. We'll try to make your second, if you have one.
Before we go, that was, I shouldn't say anything now, but we have a free T-shirt offer that Jerry wanted me to tell
good.
about. Yes,
Tell
okay. We're offering a free T-shirt. Look on Dick's page. It's the Facebook Dick Morris Com, so his main public page. If you have any problems, you can private message me. And you want to comment and post, and you'll be eligible for a free T-shirt that says "Hillary Lies Matter." Wow.
Hillary Lies Matter?
Yep.
Oh, that's great. Did Jerry think that up?
Yes.
Or did you?
Yeah, he's paying for it. Nope, Jerry.
Hillary Lies Matter. That's great.
So comment, post, and all that good stuff in this feed. And
please share this with other
definitely.
folks.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.